Inger had up in Norway went off and spent time in a treehouse, some 9 meters off the ground. So where's the treehouse photo? There we go. So this was the photo she put in and said, I spent a night in a treetop hut 9 meters above the ground. This was the emergency exit. Now this is too busy a photo and not very good in any senses, but my question is, how can you give a sensation or recreate the depth when you take a photo looking down? And I thought that's a really, really interesting question. And it is one of those things that we are often faced with. So here we can see that we're looking down. We can see a ladder here, and we get attached to the trees. She made a point of the fact that this wasn't the only way up or down. This was in fact the emergency exit, and it does look a bit scary if you had to try and climb up and down it. And you can tell that it's down, but you're not really getting much of a sense of the height. 9 meters is big. You know, that's 30 feet off the ground if you talking imperial measurements. So how do you get a sense of that kind of height? And so what we're talking about is height and depth in photos. And that then there's a whole bunch of different tips and technique or tricks and techniques you can use to add more depth, give that illusion of depth, because it's all illusion. The fact is, these photos that we love to create are two-dimensional. They're just dots on a flat screen, or they're ink droplets on a flat piece of paper. We want to try and create the illusion of depth. We want to have that sense that we could kind of fall into the photo, or not literally fall out of the tree, but that sense that, what would that feeling be like? How do I enhance that feeling? So when Inger was there looking down the trap door, you get that vertigo feeling where your stomach sort of slightly goes and whoa, that's a height. How do you capture that in a photo? Now, in essence, there's a handful of different ways of getting a sense of depth. Now, there's two key elements to distance, and that distance is whether you are looking down to a trapdoor, whether you are looking off into the landscape, or whether you're standing at the bottom looking up at a tall tree or a tall building. The same things apply. One is the nearer an object is, the bigger it is. The further away it is, the smaller it is. So if you have two objects where one is closer, and also where two objects which we think of as being the same size, and one is larger and one is smaller, we will naturally assume the smaller one is further away. So my hand's the same size. This hand is now smaller. It's further away. On a flat screen, you can't necessarily tell. I might have one big hand and one small hand. Now it's a small hand and a larger hand again. So now this hand is so large, it's larger than my head. So we've got that. Now the second thing is, and it relates, but is perspective lines. That basically, if you have two lines, they converge in the distance. These two things are the bit that you're trying to really capture. These are the things which you're trying to make sense of. Is a distance, things in a distance are going to be smaller and lines are going to converge. So let me talk then a little bit about, or show you a couple of versions of. So here's a photo, Castle Douglas, snowy day, looking down the high street. And here we've got those converging lines. So all those lines are pointing straight down the middle of that photo. And we know that, because of all our experience, that the road is in fact parallel. That if you and your friend walked either side of that road, you would stay the same distance apart from the top to the bottom. However, as we look into the photo here, it gets smaller as it gets further down. The lines get closer together. So therefore we have this sense of depth. We have this sense of movement going down through the image. Another version of this, guitar strings. With this, again, the neck is getting smaller as it's going down. But what we've also introduced into this is using the notion of depth of focus with your camera as well. So if you use a relatively narrow depth of focus, or, so you've got a relatively wide aperture, then stuff in the foreground or wherever you decide to focus, that's going to be in focus, and stuff in the distance is going to be out of focus. So if you notice on this, it's around this fret, just by the edge of the guitar there, it's the 15th fret, that's in focus. And as we come further back, it goes out of focus, and as we go further forward, it goes more and more out of focus. And that in itself is not just the fact that the lines are converging as it gets further away, but the focus is going more out of focus. So if we've got something in focus and then we can relate it to what's going out of focus, that too gives us a sense of depth. Here's another one where what we're playing with is, here we've got two aerial acrobats, aerial dancers, and we've got one here up on her ribbons, and then we've got one down here. Now this one is being framed by the silks that are coming down from the other one, but we also, because they are both wearing the same, well, it's two people, they're both wearing the same outfit, they're both hanging down, we know that they will be more or less the same size. So the fact that this one at the bottom is so much smaller than the one at the top, again, helps give us that sense of the fact that she is obviously further away. And the fact that we have these silks hanging down here is kind of framing that as well. We've got something in the foreground to focus on to give us a sense of scale and depth. And then finally, I think probably one of the best examples I've got of this is this photo of down on a beach. So we have both the sense of the converging lines, where we've got the wet of the sea, where it's wet on the edge of the beach, moving up here, and then we've got the edge of the waves of the sea moving in here, and so we've got that lovely kind of converging triangle. Even got the edge of the dunes over on the right, and they're coming together. At the same time, we have a figure on the right, and then we have other figures off in the distance. And we instinctively know that, okay, even if these people over here were smaller than the person standing here, they wouldn't be that much smaller. There is a range. We're not even kind of Lilliput here. So we know that those people must be further away. And so all these things conspire. So big, small, depth of focus if you're playing with that, something in the foreground, something in the background, converging lines. These are all the tricks that you need in order to give the illusion of depth of what is otherwise a two-dimensional surface. So from that then, if we go back to your original picture. So from this angle, you're not really getting everything that you wanted out of it. So what could you do in order to have more of an effect, given everything we've started with? Well, I would say one of the first things you could do is if you were the other side of the trapdoor, so that you're actually up against the ladder, and then if you were sort of literally perched on the edge of the ladder, looking down the length of the ladder, then that sense of converging lines as it went down, especially with the slats getting closer and closer together, it would look more like this kind of, this effect, or rather, okay, let's say it would look more like the road. As the road kind of comes down, so the ladder would be going down as well. If you were to use the effect of your aperture, you could focus on one or two of the slats, have a few of the slats nearer the top that are in sharp focus, and then you allow the focus to drop away as the slats move further down. That too would give us a sense of depth. This idea of framing becomes another one. If you then stood up from the trapdoor and actually took a shot down, so you got the trapdoor itself in the shot, then the frame then becomes your kind of anchor point for the top, and then that's going to emphasize the fact that anything that's the other side of that is obviously further away. A bit like looking through a window. Sometimes you can use this effect, say taking a photo out the window, but you include part of the window frame. And what it does is it anchors you here, and it makes whatever's the other side of the window automatically seem further away. And then finally, the other bit, which you don't have in your photo, but you would need to arrange, would be to have something at the bottom which is in contrast to where we are at the top. If you had a person standing at the bottom looking up, like they're shouting or they're waving or they're tying up a rope or doing, doesn't really matter, but if you had a person down at the bottom, we know roughly in our heads what a person looks like, and so the scale of that person would give us an indication of the height or the depth of that 9 meters down from the treehouse. So I hope that helps, that it's really ultimately understanding that is about this notion of perspective in lines and small, big, closer, further away. And then the other trick that you've got is you can adjust your aperture to create a depth of focus. And between these things, these are the tools you then have to give you that sense of depth. So I hope that helps.